Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Now that 2026 is here, the Democratic and Republican candidates will be sprinting to the March 3rd primary. I spoke with Jasper Scherer, politics editor of the Texas Tribune, and Brad Johnson, formerly of the Texan, about the biggest political contest this year, the U.S. Senate race. And we discussed the Republican and Democratic primaries.
Both primaries are going to be fascinating, but just thinking of the Democratic side, I think Jasmine Crockett's candidacy is, sort of the initial discussion surrounding her. A lot of it has been about her pitch is that she, thinks that there's all this kind of untapped potential in the electorate that, kind of go back to the refrain that Democrats have sounded for some time now, that Texas is not a red state, it's a non-voting state. Crockett's really leaning into that with her campaign and sort of centering her pitch around the idea that she is best positioned to unlock these kind of disaffected, non-voting folks who lean to the left. So that, it's going to be interesting to see if Democratic voters, if enough of them buy that argument, if, how many folks are voting, based on which candidate they think is the most electable, and how many of them see Talrico versus Crockett as that person who's best equipped to defeat the Republican incumbent. But it's going to be a crazy amount of money, millions of dollars thrown around. You're looking at two of the best fundraisers in the party in Texas, if not nationally.
Brad.
There was a poll put out recently on the race, and Crockett was expectedly in first. I think it was 51-43 over Talrico. But the more interesting questions that I saw in this showed two paths, really, for Democratic voters in Texas. The one asked which candidate they believe mobilizes the Democratic base more, and that was Jasmine Crockett. The other question asked was which candidate they believe expands the tent more, brings in more crossover voters or even soft Republican voters, and that was Talrico. So Texas Democrats have two choices. They can choose one of two paths here, and both candidates, of course, will try and do both. But even their voters are seeing a clear delineation between the two in terms of their skill sets and what they bring to the table. Do they pick, like Jasper said, do they pick the person they think has the best chance to win in November next year? Jasmine Crockett is saying that is her. Clearly, she's in first place in the primary, but James Talrico still thinks he can win the primary as well. So the strategy is going to be fascinating to watch, how they message themselves to voters. And then, obviously, whoever emerges, they're going to try and move more to the middle because this is still a red state. It's not Oklahoma in terms of partisan leaning, but it is still a red state.
I do think electability in the Democratic primary is going to be the number one issue for Democratic voters to sort out. And one thing we know is that a whole bunch of Republicans, including the lieutenant governor, told me last week that he sees if Congresswoman Crockett is the standard bearer, if she is the Democratic nominee, that she is going to energize and mobilize every single Republican to come out and vote against her and for the Republican, whoever it is. What do you make of that argument?
I can already see the ads being cut. There's the comment she made, and whether it's out of context or not, it doesn't matter because it's going to be used. Yeah. It is the comment about South Texas Hispanics who voted Trump having, quote, slave mentality. You're a fool if you don't believe that those ads are already cut for Republicans, and they will tie everyone down ballot to her if she is the nominee. Now, maybe she can counteract that and disprove it enough if there is room for disapproval in order to cancel that out. But Republicans are banking on sticking Jasmine Crockett to every single Democrat down ballot, just like national Republicans are trying to stick Zohran Mamdani, the new mayor of New York City, to all Democrats across the country. The strategy is already laid out. It's already happening. It's just a question of whether it actually works.
Jasper?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that, Crockett would unlock more Republicans than Talrico. Just sort of on paper, you look at some of the more inflammatory comments that she's made, and just the degree to which, Republicans are kind of licking their chops to put those comments in all of their ads, as Brad was just saying. But, and I think we could look back to, historical examples when Beto O'Rourke was running against Ted Cruz in 2018. There was a lot made about, Beto turning out all these legions of Democratic voters to vote for him. But on the flip side, Cruz was, I think, quite effective as well at sort of framing O'Rourke as this flaming liberal and, kind of painting that race as a battle for the future of Texas. And, you saw a hefty Republican turnout in that race too. So we definitely have like historical precedent for, kind of a not inflammatory, but just, if Republicans see a threat, they've been able to activate their base, based on who is running on the Democratic side. So definitely think Crockett we could see the same effect if she's the nominee.
Let's talk about the Republican Senate primary. Obviously, this has been really going on since April with the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, challenging Senator Cornyn, and then you have Wesley Hunt coming in the fall. And so the latest I saw from Decision Desk HQ was Paxton leading at, I believe, 32%, Cornyn at 27%, and Hunt at 23%, with still a lot of people undecided. People really haven't focused on it, but after the first of the year, I think they are going to start focusing on it. And one of the questions I have is, does Paxton's divorce, which has been very well publicized, does that hurt him among some of his support? Whoever wants to start first.
It certainly is hurting among some Republican voters. And we now see, I'm aware of multiple people in my life that I know who they're not a fan of Cornyn because of his politics, and they're not a fan of Paxton because of his baggage. And now they have a third option, Wesley Hunt. Now, I don't think that's enough to put Wesley Hunt into the runoff, but it can take away from Paxton. It could also take away from Cornyn, and we'll see how the votes actually shake out. But this is heading to a runoff one way or another because Hunt entered the race. And in all likelihood, it's going to be Paxton in first in the primary, Cornyn in second, unless Wesley Hunt can work a miracle on it. But I'm not really, because of what has happened nationally, particularly with Donald Trump and being the face of the party and the personal baggage he had that didn't matter in the Republican primary. I'm not sure it's going to have a huge effect, but Cornyn's going to throw everything at the wall and try and make it stick.
Jasper.
I mean, it certainly hasn't cost him to this point, not necessarily his divorce specifically, but just his other baggage. He has shown himself to be so Teflon-like that it's kind of hard to look at this latest development and say, okay, this is going to be the thing that, really causes voters to turn away from him. That said, in past primaries that Paxton has been in, I guess there has been, at least in one case, an alternative option when George P. Bush was running against him in the primary. I think Wesley Hunt maybe is trying to pitch himself as a more conservative challenger. I think folks were maybe queasy about getting on board with Bush back in 2022, just because they weren't as comfortable with his, conservative bona fides. But, we saw Paxton face a challenger back then when he had, ongoing legal troubles hanging over his head that have since been resolved. So, it's hard to see the divorce itself causing a mass exodus from the Paxton camp.
My thanks to Jasper Scherer and Brad Johnson.